We'll do a review in Lekutei Sichas in Chelek Yutes, the third Sicha for Chag Sukkos. In this Sicha, the Rebbe explains in the mitzvah of Hakel, which was done on the after the first days of Sukkos, was the mitzvah of Hakel on the 8th year, after the 7th year, after the Shemitah year, the year of Hakel. Over there, we find an exceptional participation of babies in the mitzvah, which we don't find anywhere else under bar mitzvah, and children to be part of the mitzvah. And the Rebbe goes through to explain seemingly two different Gemaras, which seems to be a little bit difficult, seems to be contradicting, and also to explain what exactly is the obligation on the children. Are the children really obligated, or in what sense are they obligated? The Rebbe goes through all the details of it, and also explaining later on the idea according to the Yena Shel Torah and Pnimis HaTorah. Let's go inside. So, Aleph, Chag HaSukkos Gimel Aleph. V'negeyet zu mitzvahs Hakel, as it relates to the mitzvah of Hakel, was Zmano, when is the Hakel? Is b'matzoi Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag HaSukkos. After the first day of Sukkos, after the day of first day of Sukkos, you have the Hakel, the mitzvah Hakel. But those is the Oneb for the Chalamoyed tag. This is the beginning of the days of the Chalamoyed. Gefindt man an inyan miyuchad was me gefindt nit by andere mitzvahs HaTorah. So we find something unique, which we don't find by any of the other mitzvahs HaTorah. The mitzvah von Hakel, this mitzvah of gathering, nemt tarum alle Yidden. This encompasses all Yidden, oich taf, also the very little children. The state in Pasuk, as the Pasuk states, Hakel es ha'om ha'anoshim va'anoshim va'atav goimer. Gather, the Pasuk says, the people, the men, the women, and the children, etc. So, why is this so unique? Because Bichlal gewinnt man it. Generally, we don't find, as in a mitzvah de Reise, that when we're talking about a Torah command, zon ketanim homen ayishtatvus b'de Reise, that the minors should have a participation from the Torah zusammen mit alle Yidden, together with all Yidden. Mashenken b'Hakel, which is different as opposed to Hakel. Is the Torah, the koilen, their mitzvahs, the Torah includes them in the mitzvah zusammen mit alle Yidden, together with all Yidden. So the Rebbe says, v'yesh loymar, we can say, as in them inyan meyuchad shebahakel, in this unique, special item by Hakel, drikt sich aus an nekuda ikris, that expresses a very major, fundamental point in the Teuchen, the inyan for mitzvahs Hakel, in the content and the idea of the mitzvah Hakel Kamon, as the Rebbe will explain in the Yena Shel Torah, how this penetrates the essence of the Amunah of every Yid, and where there is no difference between Ketanim and Gedolim, etc., etc. Okay, so now the Rebbe is going to start to explain what does it really mean that the children participate. So one, at first glance, would seem that the children are not actually obligated in the mitzvah, but rather they become part of the objects which you do the mitzvah. So the mitzvah is on the king to gather everybody, and part of the everybody includes the children, but it's not like it's their mitzvah. But the Rebbe is going to bring out from a Gemara in Kiddushin in which it seems differently. Base, the learned in Pashtus, as you learn it is simply, is the Ishtatfus von Taf in mitzvahs Hakel, the participation of the children in the mitzvah of Hakel, Achivas Ischal, that obligation rests not on the Ketanim Atzmam, it's not on the children themselves. Nor if them Avein, it is the father and the mother's obligation. It's not, the child is not obligated. The parents are obligated that they should bring with the Gemara in Chagiga, as the Gemara in Chagiga says, that Zoktav Lomo Boim Kidelitin Schar Lemiviyayim. That why are the children coming? That is to give Sechar to those that bring them. So basically, it means there is no actual mitzvah for the children themselves, they taf themselves, but the mitzvah is on the parents to bring the children to the Hakel event, as the Gemara says, to give reward for the parents. So it's the parents' responsibility to bring the children. It's the mitzvah of the parents. So Rebbe says, look, what it needs to, from this, at a simple level, it should come out that as euch wenn der Kotten is in Azam Matzev, was a Gottel in demselben Matzev is Potter von Hakel. If the child is in such a condition, had he been an adult, he would be exempt from the mitzvah of Hakel. Say, for example, the Dugma, Acheresh Sumo Ukeyutzibay. If he is mute, he can't hear or speak, he is blind, those we learn out are exempt from the mitzvah of Hakel. But since the mitzvah for the taf is not for themselves, because there is only the mitzvah for the parents to bring them to the event. So what difference does it make? Is eras cotton nichlon chiyuv. So a minor is included in the obligation because it's not an obligation for the child. It's an obligation for the parents to bring the children. So the status of the child seems to be irrelevant. So if the child is blind, he would still have to be brought by the parents because it's not the condition of the child, it's the parents' mitzvah to bring the children. Is the Baal der Chiyuv mitzvah is nit of him, since the obligation and the mitzvah is not on the child, not if an av to bring him, but it's on the father to bring the child. Is nit talking chilukim velchamatzav their kontni, so therefore it makes no difference the condition in which the child finds himself in. So it would seem, if we accept the simple approach that it's the father's obligation to bring his child, that a child who would be exempt as an adult should still be obligated to be brought by the parents. But the Rebbe says we see in another Gemara in Kiddushin that doesn't seem like that is the case. It seems that it does depend upon, it would depend upon the condition of the child, which would almost tell us that the mitzvah is on the child. But based, if this is the case, so it's not understood. The Gemara Zokti Maseches Kiddushin, the Gemara in Tractate Kiddushin says, "B'negei mitzvahs hakel," as it relates to the mitzvah of hakel. As a filu and in posig vot nit gestanen beferish der chiyuv hakel by noshim. Even if in the verse the Gemara said would not say specifically there's hakel for women also. The pasuk says hakel as hanoshim noshim b'tav. The Gemara during Kedushin says if the pasuk only said hakel as hanoshim b'atav, so when them chiyuv by noshim abgelern, then you would have learned the obligation for women. We would learn it as a foretory from the minors. If the Torah would have said Hakil hanoshim b'hatav, that the minors have to come, of course the women have to come. As tefeilim chayovim noshim loikol shekain, those secondaries, the children, have to come, would be a foretory. Isn't it a foretory that women should come? For sure they should come. That's what the Gemara says there. So basically, we're saying that the obligation for women could have been learned out from the obligations from the children. But If we should assume that the obligation by the children is not their obligation, it's only the parents' obligation. If the obligation for the children is only for the parents that bring them, kinal, as we said before, so how could we use the language and we say if minors are obligated? The tefelim, the secondary is obligation. They're not obligated. It's not their obligation, obligation father. But that seems to be just the words, the wording, but also in content. So further, since the tefelim seinen nicht mechuyev, they're not obligated. Wie kann von sei aroisler nach Kavachomer as noshim seinen mechuyev? How are you able to learn from them a foratory that women would be obligated? They don't even have an obligation. It's not just, it says chayovim. But you're trying to say that women would be obligated to participate because children are obligated to participate. But the children's obligation is not their obligation. The children's obligation, if we should say like before, is the father's obligation. And so we have to say that there's some sort of an obligation. First of all, the language of the Gemara is that tefeilim chayovim, that the minors are obligated. And second of all, we're learning obligation for the women, which would be their obligation. How could you learn from Kal V'chomer from children that don't have an obligation for women to be obligated? Now, the Rebbe says, maybe you're going to say that the drasha, Rebbe is going to prove that this drasha of the Gemara is lehalocha, when the Gemara says that children are coming to give reward for the parents, it's only a drasha, but really there is a chiyuv, like the Gemara in Kiddushin says over there, that we would learn out. And this is just agoda. But the Rebbe proves this is not an agoda, this is actually halacha. We have to reconcile it. The Rebbe continues in the bracket. He says, it's difficult to say, as the Gemara was that the Gemara that says to give reward to those who bring them is not the halacha. It's not the halacha. It's not speaking according to halacha. This is not a hagoda adrash. Since this is only a hagoda, it's only a drash. When ein lemeidim and hagodas, we know that you cannot really learn from the expounding parts of the Torah. So maybe this is not halachically. Unaz lalocha and lalocha, we can assume that the minors, Zayin and are actually obligated themselves. Kanal from Masechta Kiddushin, as we said, Masechta Kiddushin says Tfeilim Chayovim, and we learned the Chiyuv of the woman. There is an obligation. So, because first of all, the Rebbe says we find sometimes that many we do learn, and this is brought down as a source, and this is a surprising thing. Minors to be chayiv. Borum. Then gewinnt bekamen mekoimes am lernt alois for the Gemara ibn Galacha. Find in many places that from this Gemara litis charveim we learn halacha. So it's not just a drash. That's not la halacha. V'mezet as moina mitzvahs bring up the Gemara. You see those who count the mitzvahs bring down this Gemara. B'shayches to mitzvahs hakil as it relates to the mitzvah of hakil. This me gefindt euch in poskim. As we learn from them adrois, the limud atayda banoshim, that you learn with regards to the study of Torah by women, as brought down in the Bachir Deya. There's a difference. So we find that it's used the Gemara that it's also halachically, and therefore this cannot be understood just as a drash. So the question is, are these children mechuyev, or it's a mechuyev on the parents? From the Gemara Kiddushin, it seems it's a chiyuv on the children, Tfeilim Chayovim, and the Gemara wants to learn out the Kavachem, would have learned out the Kavachem for Noshim from there, which is a Chiv. And on the other hand, the Gemara says it's only it's only for the parents, not for the children. And the Rebbe in Ois Gimel wants to say maybe we can make a distinction over here between what age of the children. Very little children are brought only as reward for their parents. That's what the first pasuk talks about. When it says in the beginning of Hakel Noshim Noshim B'Tav, even the very little children. And the Gemara Kedushin is talking about children that Higiu L'Chinuch. And over there, there's actually an obligation. Let's look inside Gimel. We could have said, based on how the commentaries explain, as in the psukim from Hakel, the verses of Hakel discuss two categories of minors. One category is minors that have already reached the age of education. You can educate them. Usually it's considered like 6 or 7. But in zweiten Pasuk about them, in the second verse, it's already been instructed. It says over there, not in the first Pasuk, but then it says, so we're talking about actually their children, and their children who had not known should listen and learn to fear Hashem Elokeichem. So there's an obligation over here, seems like, on the children. So over here it says clearly, as the mitzvah liktev ze alein, there's a mitzvah on the children. But the freer dike posik, but you have to be in the age of chinuch to be able to learn and to hear. But the previous posik, hakil sa'om hanoshim v'hanoshim v'hataf, over there that that also talks about a second category. Taf, we're talking about little children, from an ingeren gil, from a younger age. Such minors that have not reached yet the age of education. And with regards to them, it is said, why do we bring them? That's to give reward to those who bring them. So we're talking about two separate aged children. But it's understood, it's not unique, that schar to the mevi'eim also exists for those who reach chinuch, although they have their own mitzvah, but still, the zilbas of time, if you go to reasoning, they can't come themselves, they have to be brought. And if they get reward for bringing, so they should get reward for both children. But the older, the chinuch children get the reward also, in addition to the parents' reward. And the first category, who are under the age of higil chinuch, they are only reward, the parents are rewarded, but there's no obligation for them. So according to this, it turns out, when the Gemara in Kedushin says Tfeilim Chayovim, we're talking about children who have reached the age of chinuch. And they can be included in what the second pasuk talks about. They can hear and they can learn. That's part of them. And that would be the Gemara in Kedushin. And when the Gemara says Lama Boim, he's talking about the babies, whether they can't even not the Giluchem. So, but there is, it's difficult. First of all, the languages, it's hard. And also mentioned before, I said before, that it'll be like something really unique. We don't find that there's an obligation in the Torah on children. So the Rebbe says like this. So Aleph, number one. Generally, when we talk about children that have reached the age of chinuch, so you have to educate them. So who is the one obligated to education for the mitzvahs? That is not upon the minor. the minor is not obligated in education. The father, the one who raises and educates them, has to educate the child. So it's not like it's an obligation on the child. He says that in most cases the father. It's also in our case. When we talk about educating, it would be the father's obligation, not some new obligation. So when we say, like Ubenayim, even if you would say that from the second pasuk that they should learn, means that the father is obligated to teach them that, not that it's their own obligation. And even if you're going to insist to say that by the mitzvah of Hakil is that there is a specific mitzvah over here in this pasuk. There's a mitzvah just in the minors themselves. Mitzvahs is going to be different than all mitzvahs. Over here we refer that the minor himself is obligated based on this pasuk that there is an obligation on the minor himself. We'll say it's taka different. And there is actually reason to believe that it's different. Rebbe continues in the bracket that especially according to the words of the earlier commentators, was halten, and they are of the view as a kotten sheigia lechinuch, that if a child, a minor, has reached the age of chinuch, so in general, this is when all mitzvahs, hagam as the chiv chinuch is chalif mechanech. Although the obligation for education rests on the educator, meintes aber nit as der kotten is potter. That doesn't mean that the minor is exempt. But because of the mitzvah education, the minor is also obligated. So it wouldn't be so much different than all other mitzvahs, because according to their view, which is brought down in Tosfos and in other places over here in Hara 22, that the obligation is always not totally exempt from the minor, only on the father. So it would be, so this would also be. But the Rebbe says to say this, so there will be a difference between the two categories of ketanim. And the Rebbe, going back to his original idea that if the obligation is on the father, it makes no difference the condition of the son, because it's only his mitzvah. But if the obligation is on the person, then it makes a difference the condition. If he's blind, he wouldn't have to bring him. So if we're talking about minors, babies that don't have not chinuch at all, you'd have to bring even the ones that are in a condition which they're not, they would be potter if they were adults. And by the Egiul Chinuch, since they have their own obligation, then you will be potter. But so according to this, there will be a novelty about the difference between the two categories of the minors. As by Ketane, when it's very small ones, but the Chiv mitzvah is norich meviyeh, and where the obligation is only on those that bring them. In order to give the schar for those who bring him Masechet Chagiga, is the Chiv and Hakel Koilel. So that obligation to gather them, that would include also such minors. Based on their condition, if they were adults, they would be exempt from Hakel. But since the obligation is on the parents, so it doesn't matter what their condition is, so you still have to bring them. But specifically, and only those who are actually older, not babies, but they reached the age of chinuch, the tefillin, the Masechet Kedushin, those tefillin which we talk about in the Masechet Kedushin, since they themselves are obligated in Hakel, is their chiv chal nordan. So then their chiv obligates them nor in a case when they seinen in Azamatzav, only if they're in a condition was Begadluson, only if they would be in their adult, they would be Mechuyev and Hakel. Because since they are obligated because of themselves, and if they're adults, they'll be potter. They're potter as minors too. We never found anywhere to make such a kind of distinction between the two categories in the minors. Beis ve'ikar. Mainly, the Rebbe says, the fact that it says that the tofel is obligated, it doesn't say that minors are chayim, which could mean it says tefillim, is mashma bepashtus, so it appears when we do it, we learn it on the simple level, as dort retzich wegen demselben Zug von we're talking about the same category of minors as a chagiga, which is tefillim, which is taf. The word taf means tefillim. Those are the secondary. Those are the little children. Uvi Rashi is medayik as tefillim chayovim basement from loshen v'ataf. Rashi learns out specifically, derives that how do you know tefillim is the loshen taf. So when the Gemara in Kedushin uses tefillim chayovim, he's talking about the taf, which state in Friedrich Posik, which is in the previous Posik. Rashi, this is Rashi in the Gemara, in Kedushin over there. So Rashi doesn't bring Uberneim. Rashi says from the Posik, the Taf, which means the very small children. Not from the Posik, so we see that Rashi learns that we're talking about the minor children. That means Muchach Adar Koten Atz Moihotev Zir Dem Chiyuv for mitzvahs Hakel. That the minor itself has the obligation of Hakel. Tefillim Chayovim means the very minors. Und Leut die Idee ist, that der Chiyuv is Chal Oich Oif Ktanim Ktanim. And according to the opinions that it is also obligated. So in the first taf we're talking about babies. So is the chiv is chal oichev ktanim ktanim? Then it applies even to the minors, even to the babies. So they are also mechuyev mitzvah. So we're not making a distinction. Yes, there are some opinions that would say that you only have to bring those who can understand a little bit, but those who say you have to bring the babies, you have to bring them. The Gemara talks about tefillim here is talking about the same tefillim. So the issue we have in front of us, why do we say that it's only to give reward to the parents when the Gemara says there's a chiyuv, whoever you have to bring, there's a chiyuv on the children themselves? And how do we reconcile this with what we know, generally speaking, that there is no such a thing as children having obligated in mitzvahs? In this case, we're even saying the tefillim, the babies. Since that's the case, so the question comes back to its place. Is das Masi midem was the Gemara zokt wegen taf? How is this fit with that which the Gemara says with regards to taf? The Gemara says to give reward for those who bring them. When the Gemara says tefillim, and besides, it's actually there's a rule that is obvious and it's also logical. How could you apply? It doesn't make a logical to say a minor is obligated. How could a minor be obligated? Was I not given idea? They don't have yet opinion, they're not knowledge, they don't have intellect yet, they don't have knowledge to be obligated. How could the Torah place an obligation on a child? There's something else going on over here. The Rebbe will explain all this very beautifully, that the fact that the king, who's the actual mechuyev in the mitzvah to gather all the people, the fact that they become object of his mitzvah because he cannot fulfill the mitzvah of Hakil without having the people that he has to gather. That makes them, in a sense, mechuyev, as the Rebbe will explain, barichas. But first, the Rebbe is going to explain the drasha, introducing the drasha, what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah brings down in the Gemara. Dalet. But das Verstehen behagdim abiyur, so we'll understand this by first introducing the explanation in Hascholas Hadrash from Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, in the beginning of the drasha of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So he says, Imanoshim boim lilmoid, noshim boim lishmoya. So the way he introduces the question, why do children come? So he starts off, okay, let it be that the men, they're coming to learn. I mean, there's an obligation of studying for the men. Noshim, which don't have the obligation to study, boys lishmoya, as we'll see a little bit more, the difference between Lilmod and Lishmoya as we're going on. Women are coming to listen, not to study. Study, they're not obligated, but they're coming to listen. And then the Gemara says, so why are the children coming? Why do we have to introduce these 2 points, that Noshim boim lilmed, Noshim boim lulamed, Lishmoya, before we ask the question? Why can't we ask directly the question, why we bring in the children? This point that men are coming to learn and women to listen, it says in the pasuk, L'man yishmu, l'man yilmadu. L'chayre, vos is der mit mechadish? What is the novelty here? Da steht doch meferish in pasuk. The pasuk says you should bring them l'man yishmu, l'man yilmadu, so that they will hear and so that they will learn. Well, okay, but maybe this is just, we understand this, but why do they? So it's not really a chiddush in this. Maybe there is no novelty in the first sentences, men come for learning and women come to listen. It's just an introduction. But why do you bring the children? But when there is no chiddush in men, we don't need that introduction. There's always, whenever we say bishloima, there's something that itself, but here the pasuk says that. Again, it learn as enochanami. Can learn that it's actually true. We're not telling you anything new here. When he says men come to learn and women to listen, he's not intending to give us any novelty. He's just saying this as an introduction to what he concludes. Why are the babies coming? Why are the little children coming? Similar to the style what the Gemara uses. We will understand that this is okay. And they're saying it, that's understood. Why that? Anoshim, we understand. But why children? But that's not here, doesn't fully really sit well. Vorum Aleph number 1. So then the Gemara, Elazar ben Azariah should have used, instead of saying, if used in the common, Bishloimo, the Hanicha, the Bishloim, Beis Nochmed. Furthermore, Bishloimo zog the Gemara, even when the Gemara says Bishloimo, the Gemara says, when it is doing them, Achidush inyan of the Svara, there's some sort of novelty. This is okay, but those okays also have some sort of a logic, was we learn Taruis, or need for statement first, we'll learn it out, and not that it's explicit. And the Gemara used Losh. We understand according to their opinion. So it means there's one opinion says so, there's another opinion, so we understand according to that opinion, but that's an opinion. So that's what we would say, okay, it is okay in daring opinion. But in the number in our case, doesn't fit to say that because Gitar Nitzuk and Shum Chidush, he doesn't add any novelty, any new ideas of them what the Pasuk Zog Befedish and what the Pasuk says Befedish. Pasuk says, I'm the Shmoya. But This Rebbe, when you look at the Rashi in Chumash, Rashi doesn't even say it as this is one Bishlam. Rashi gives two different Rashis. First, he explains when the men are coming Lilmoid and the women are coming Lishmaya, and then he says, and the children come to give reward. So it doesn't even follow in the Bishlema style, the Yosha Yuksha. So it's more difficult. The Drosh of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Verd Gebrachim Pirush Rashi la Torah. This expounding of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is brought in Rashi's commentary in the Torah, eingeteilt of the Basundere Werte from Posik. Over there, it's separated by the different words of the Posik. Of Anoshim Zokt Rashi Lilmai. With regards to men, Rashi says they're coming to learn. The Noch is the Matik from Posik Noshim. And then he quotes the verse, the women, when he's Farish Lashmoya, comes to listen. And when he talk about children, Lama Bo, Losis Chalim, why did they come to give reward to those who bring them? Zetman. So what do we see? As euch der Lilma by Anoshim, and then the Shmoya by Anoshim, the learning that applies to the men and the listen that applies to the women is a pirush farzich. It is a independent interpretation. Nid blois hagdoma to the shayla. It's not just an introduction to the question. Taf lama boim. Why are the children coming? It's not the bishlam, but it's by itself. So what's the chiddush of it? So hey, the Rebbe is saying maybe this. Actually, the pasuk says by both together. Hakel sanoshim vanoshim batav. The man yishmu leman yilmedu. So it seems like almost that the noshim are also coming lilmed because it says by both. The man yishmu leman yilmedu would go on both of them. So maybe Rabbi Elazar is trying to distinguish, to separate that women are not actually not obligated to learn. That's why it's only yishmu. Hey, l'chayre yesh levayer al pi divrei Tosfos. L'chayre we can explain based on Tosfos what Tosfos says. Omar be Yerushalmi the loy kiben azai the Omar chayiv odom lilmod lebitei Torah. In the Yerushalmi it states that this does not follow Ben Azai who says that a person has to teach his son Torah. He says, "Bald in Pasuk state." Since the Pasuk says "Leman Yishmu uLeman Yilmadu Stam," it says both have to learn. Mashma Koilil Oich Noshim. So because it says both Hagnoshim and Noshim, so that they listen and they learn. So it would seem that also women have to learn, and that would be the view of Ben Azai, that there's a chiyuv Talmud Torah for women. The Riberot Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, whose the view was haltas mitornik lenen, Torah mit Bnei Yisrael, that with Jewish women, with daughters of Israel, you're not allowed to study Torah. Nitvi ben Azai, he disagrees with Ben Azai. Gedar zog mefarzai, so he had to say and explain as the pasuk mainly tzdodim. But the pasuk is talking about to two different sides. Anoshim boyim lilmoid. The noshim boys, men are coming to learn, and the women are coming to listen. So basically, we're bringing in the drosha of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, explaining to you what the pasuk means. That it doesn't mean that the women are coming together with the men to learn, but Nafkin, no, that the women are just coming to listen, and it's the men that are coming to learn. But the Rebbe says it doesn't seem like the drosha over here is coming to teach us a law of Hilchos Talmud Torah. It's coming to teach us the din of Hakel. So, but this is difficult to interpret it, to learn this way here. But in the sugi in the Gemara and the drosha for Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, because this discussion, and this Gemara, and this expounding of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Kumen Lernen the Iker, they are mainly coming to teach us the dinim and pratim, the laws and the details from Parshas Hakel, of the section of Hakel. Unitam din, and not the din as noshim zayin mechuyoves, or the Rasulah b'lim Torah, where the women are obligated or prohibited to learn Torah, and therefore it has to fit within the context of the mitzvah of Hakel over here. What is the obligation And as far, what are we trying to serve here? So, the Nekudas Habir was at the point of the explanation. Pashtus aposik hakilas ha'om anoshim etav gomer leman. Read the posik. Gather. Who's gathering? The king. He has to gather the people, the men and the women, so that they will leman yishmu, so that they will listen, uleman, and so that they would yilmudu v'yidu. So the reason the pasuk is saying, why should the king gather? So what does it mean? The pashtus is as the mitzvah of an hakil is if this mitzvah of gathering is an individual, the melech. Erzol makil zayin as hanoshim etav, that he should gather the men, the women, and the children. Aber nit a mitzvah with hanoshim etav gufa. This isn't a mitzvah on the men and the women and the child itself. It's the king's mitzvah. Under hemshach hakosuf, when the pasuk continues, so leman yishmu, so that they listen, leman yilmu, so that they learn. The yiras Hashem elakecha lasis, to fear Hashem, explains the purpose. Is mevar the matorah makuvan. What's the intent? What's the purpose of gathering for their mitzvah, so that they hear and listen? There's no mitzvah on them to be there. It's the mitzvah on the melech, and why the melech has to gather them. Which basically the leman do here leman, so that they will, is al derech v'leman b'komokim b'Torah. It's the same as in all places in Torah. Uledugma, for example, the Mahanashi Tzaves Bonaves Beis Achrav. Abraham says that he loves Abraham, but Mahanashi, so that he will instruct his sons and his fellow. So that your days will be increased. Right? Was B'chlava Pirov generally and mostly nitkin inyan u'pu'ula doesn't mean something that they're doing now, leman, so that they do. It is a future result. That ariskum is something which will be a result which will turn out, which will come out later on. The matoras hamitzvah von hakel, the purpose, the goal of the mitzvah of hakel durchun melech, through the king, was his makilun lein Thursday parashat Torah, which gathers and reads for them the portion of the Torah is as a result from them ariskum baklal am Yisrael. That from this it should come out by the general Jewish people, Yishma v'yomdu, so that they'll listen and they'll learn. That's the goal. It also appears, as it seems from the language of the Rambam, mitzvahs asay lahakil kol Yisrael and noshim etav. It's a positive mitzvah to gather all Yidden, men, women, and children. And to read in their ears, so they listen from the Torah parshas and mitzvahs, those parshas, those sections that encourage them to do the mitzvahs and strengthen their hand with asa emes in this true religion. Was for them is mubanas, so this is understood. Aleph, mitzvahs hakel is nitke mitzvah yedrin mas yochid. Mitzvah of hakel is not an individual mitzvah on every Jew as an individual. As darf kummen sich mishtatev sein mitzvahs hakel, that he has to come to participate in the mitzvah of hakel. Notice it's a mitzvah to makil sein, but rather it's a mitzvah to gather. Under tzivui, someone to gather. Under tzivui, who? There is someone that has to gather together. That's this obligation is to melech was because hakel is the king who has the power, the authority to gather together, or to bezdin, or to bezdin. Number two base. So it's number one, it's an individual mitzvah for the one who has the power to gather together. And number two, mitzvahs hakel is mitzvahs hamelech, tikra goymer hakel in the matorah. That the king's mitzvah is to read, to gather, and the purpose is not only for the goal. This is part of the details of the command to the king, that he should gather and read in a way. King is obligated to gather them so they listen. Was the far length of parashas? That's why he brings those sections that encourages them to do the mitzvahs, and he reads it from a platform. So it's number one, it's not an individual mitzvah, it's only the kings or the bezdins. And the mitzvah is in such a way that you should achieve the purpose. And that's part, it's not the Torah is telling us this is the purpose for the kings. Rabbi adds that even the king itself, his mitzvah is to gather them for that purpose. And that's why he has to read those portions, and he does it on a platform in order to accomplish it. What are the men, women, and children? The noshim etaf is nor is only that through their coming, the command is fulfilled, which is on the gatherer, which is on the king, their melech. Durch them was by Yidden is though the Yishmu, Yilmudu, Beyiru, the Shamru Lasis, and through this, that by Yidden, they listen and they learn, Yiru Shamru Lasis, but also in the future, not here, but from this will bring about is accomplished the purpose and the intent of the mitzvah of the malach. So based on this is all actually a mitzvah of a melech. So what is the part? So the people are just there for the king to be able to fulfill his mitzvah. But this is what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is telling us, no, that those who are become the object for the melech to do the mitzvahs, in turn get a mitzvah for themselves, because they become the vehicle through which the king performs the mitzvah. Zay is Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Mevayed Toichem Mitzvah Saken. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah explains the idea of the mitzvah of Akin. Imanoshim boyim in dos lilmoid noshim boys l'shmoya. If men that come is for the purpose to learn, and women coming to listen, osvidem is a mechadish shvei. He comes up and he gives you two novel ideas here. Number one, as a sizachiv gabre oichav da noshim atzmam to zayin boyim, that there is an actually obligation on them, on the men and the women, to come themselves to come. Noshim boyim, they have to come. They have to come. There is an obligation for them. Although the Torah placed the obligation, the mitzvah, on the one who's gathering them, which is the melech, the king, but because of the obligation of the king, there becomes a personal obligation on the men and the women durchzuführen the mitzvah of makil, in order to accomplish the mitzvah of the makil. The Rebbe brings an example, and he says this is even more, like we know that even though the man is obligated in the mitzvah to be fruitful and multiply, but he can't do it without the woman, so the woman is considered mechuyev in the mitzvah. Since the king cannot fulfill the mitzvah without the people coming there, they become considered also obligated in the mitzvah. But over here it's more, because over there it's a practical only, but here it's their coming to listen over there. Similar to the known words of the Ran, as it relates to a woman, the mitzvah of being fruitful, multiply. Although a woman doesn't have upon herself the obligation of being fruitful, multiply, yet she has the mitzvah, since she helps the husband to fulfill his mitzvah. So therefore, she is considered part of the mitzvah also. The Chelek is not, there's a difference, there's even more in our case. As far as being fruit and multiply, there is no obligation on the woman itself. She's nor was yesh lo mitzvah. There's no obligation, but she has a mitzvah. She's part of the mitzvah. Over there, her support and her participation is nor mitzvah mitzvah, because factually, the husband cannot become in the mitzvah without her. The Baal can be mitzvah, the husband cannot practically fulfill the mitzvah that lies upon him, the woman, and therefore she has a mitzvah, but not an obligation. But in our case, the status in the participation, the men and the children need nor mitzvah mitzias. Not only because factually the rech mitzvah gather mitzvah, but this is part of the definition of the mitzvah, of the purpose and the definition of the mitzvah of hakel. They seien the chefza from their mitzvah. They become the object of the mitzvah. They are the object of the mitzvah. The objective of the mitzvah is for them to be there. But this is what needs to be accomplished. A yishmu yilmadu as there probably words after der yishmu yilmadu. And therefore, so there becomes a personal obligation on them. And similar to the words of the Charedim that are known, as mitzvahs esal Yisrael, as on gebenched werden durch die Kohanim, that there is a positive mitzvah by the Kohanim to be benched through by the Kohanim. Base. Number 2, the Laman Yishmu Laman Yim Goymer. So one of them is an obligation, and Laman Yishmu Laman Yilmud, there's another chiddush here. Rabbi Chaim Wolosow Goymer is not nor the matorah v'tetzos mitzvah. It's not only the goal and the result of mitzvah, but this is the toichen mitzvah. This is the contents of the mitzvah. The chiyuv. To come to hakel. I'm coming in a minute. The Torah mitzvah, no, this is the toichen hamitzvah. This becomes the content of the mitzvah. The rechiv of the anoshim to come to hakel. Why are the men and women coming to hakel? Is not nor to sein dort. It's not just to be there, so that the mitzvah of hakel can be accomplished. As a home from the melech, for the king. And through this, you're going to reach the purpose of the mitzvah in general in the future cannot. But the limud of the shmoya is oich der teichen from their mitzvah from bias hanoshim v'noshim. But to learn and to hear becomes their mitzvah. It becomes the mitzvah of the men, and the woman becomes the limud l'shmoya. So first of all, they get an obligation, a chiv gavra, and the chiv gavra consists of learning and to listening. That's what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says. So to learn and to learn, listen, is the benefit of the mitzvah from the men and the women. What are the children coming? What kind of an obligation, what kind of a matter is there in the children? The dugma to them kumot from the noshim, which would be similar to the men and the women. They're coming, they're getting their own mitzvah there. In addition to, there is a common denominator. But through the elements the mitzvah from the makil. Through the all coming, they fulfill the mitzvah of the gatherer of the king. And the purpose of hakil. But we said that the men and the women have an additional mitzvah, their own mitzvah. There's the chiv gavra, and they are supposed to be learning, and they're supposed to be listening. Them enter Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, the ma'aseh v'natav boim is litin schalem avayim. that the act of the children coming is to give reward to those who bring them. Bald as if the taf is nichayach kinchiu. Since of them, the children is actually no obligation. Doesn't apply, we can't obligate them. Is that inya bazevet elis nisefes? So the only idea, what's the additional benefit that is from bringing them, more than just fulfilling the king's purpose of Hakel, to give the reward for those who bring them. Oistes. So now we're going to go back to explain the Gemara that women, Noshim, would have been able to be learned out from Taf. Because there is a certain part in the mitzvah, the chefts of the mitzvah, the Taf and the Noshim are equal. It is only in the extra that Anoshim benoshim there is a chiyuv gavra, and the extra by Taf is litin schar lemiviyayim. But akol ponim as a cheftza, they are equal because they're all used as the means for the melech to fulfill his mitzvah. They become the objective and the object of the mitzvah. And for that part, we can learn out the women with a kal v'chomer from the ketanim. Apizeh test inside. Apizeh is verstandig was the Gemara zogt. Now we understand the Gemara says tfeilim chayovim. We say they're obligated. Question before, what does it mean obligated? We know that there's no such a thing as a chiyuv by ketanim, and also you know that how do you have the obligation? There is a thought that we could have learned women from a kal v'chomer from Taf. If Taf are not mechuyev, but it seems like they must be mechuyev too. So that explains. In the Etzem mitzvah von Hakel seinen gleich sei anoshim sei Taf. In the essence of the mitzvah of Hakel, they're equal. The men, the women, and even the younger, the small children. The bald as durch zeir kumen, since through their coming, werd niskaim the mitzvah from the makil, the mitzvah of the one who gathers them is fulfilled. So they get the etzem mitzvah of hakel. Mitzad their mitzvah from makil, lahakil anoshim noshim betaf. Since the makil has the mitzvah to gather anoshim noshim betaf, they become part of the mitzvah. They all become an object of the mitzvah. Over there, it doesn't make a difference which minors. Even the very minor, they're also tfeilim because they're also a chefza. Since that it's through them that the mitzvah, the one who gathers, is being accomplished, which includes all the taf, and therefore they are part of the mitzvah. Since the tfeilim are obligated, they are part of the essence of the mitzvah of hakel. As an object, even if there was not state noshim by the mitzvah of hakel, but when abgelernt as euch noshim seine bechlal mitzvah, we would know that women are part of the mitzvah. See, it's nor, it's only that by noshim kumtzu as by ze verdos euch achiv gavre. By them, it also becomes an obligation on the person. The women themselves are also obligated. By the ketanim, it doesn't apply. But as far as the mitzvah as being chayiv because they are part of fulfilling the makil's obligation, they're all equal. If the noshim gufa, that the women get to be obligated because of it, there can be achiv gavre applies there. Because by ketanim it doesn't apply. By ketanim it doesn't apply. Okay, so now we're going to go back. What is the idea, Takir, that we have this chiyuv by Ketanim, which is unique to Hakil, which tells us about the mitzvah of Hakil? Yud. The Bir Bazeh to explain this in the inner matter. Was dafke by mitzvahs Hakil gefunden, that it's specifically by the mitzvah of Hakil we find as alle seine given in the mechuyev that everybody was obligated. Anoshim v'tam. Only Yidach, on the other hand, is the chiyuv mitzvah from Hakil. The obligation of mitzvah is on the one who gathers them, if the melech or bezdin, either on the king or the bezdin. But everybody's mechuyev. But the main of the obligation of the mitzvah is the one who gathered them. We'll understand it based on the language of the Rambam. As the mitzvah from Hakil is lechazik daso emes. The mitzvah of Hakil is to strengthen the true religion, or the b'lashoin chinuch, or using the language of the chinuch. Zois mitzvah amud chosu v'kovet godel b'das. This mitzvah is a strong pillar and a great honor in the religion. So we can say, what is the meaning of this? As in Yonei fun Hakil, that the idea of Hakil is to megalazain the nekudas ha'amuna b'yeder id, is to reveal the point of belief that every yid has, to reveal that sense, that point of belief we have. Well, this is the Yesod v'amud, that is the foundation, that's the pillar for stark the das ha'emes, strengthen the true religion. Umachzikos yedehem b'das ha'emes, it strengthened their hand in the true religion. The nekudas ha'amuna, the point of amuna werd nischazik and nisgal, becomes strengthened and revealed. Durch them was the melech kleibt zneuf alle Yidden in the Beis Hamikdash, through the fact that the king gathers all Yidden in the Beis Hamikdash, when there is koira lifneim and he reads in front of them. Hayois as their melech is the lev kol kal Yisrael. Since the king, he is the heart of the entire Jewish community. When bringt rein den bittel v'kabbalah so mach shemaim, he brings in that subjugation and the acceptance of the yoke of the heavenly kingdom, the Yiras Hashem in all Yidden, and the fear of God in all Yidden. Is poil durch sein makel sein the Yidden. So he accomplishes, he impacts through the fact that he gathers the Yidden, as Bazezon is Galaven, the Nekudas Hayadus, that by them should be revealed their point of their Judaism, which is expressed in their belief and the fear of Hashem. He brings about to reveal and to bring into the open their level of Emunah Yiras Hashem through the Melech, who is the heart of all the people, gathering them, and he brings them and he reads in front of them. He strengthens that Emunah. The River the Parsha Shema V'Yim Shemoya. That's why we also read, the Melech reads the portion of Shema V'Yim Shemoya, which is Kabbalah Se'el Machal Shemayim. The Shema, the first portion, is the acceptance of the heavenly kingdom. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Then V'Yim Shemoya, the Kabbalah Se'el Mitzvahs, the Mitzvahs and V'Yim Shemoya. And the Parshas Asimo, Alay Melech, I'll pay a place on me a king, which is which means to know that we are bottled to the king. But das Altis Ma'ir, this all wakes up, arouses, and carved ein by Zay, and then carves out by them the Amunah Yiras Hashem, the belief and the fear of Hashem of Meshach and Al Yorim for the duration of all the years, for as long as they live on the earth. And for that reason, because this is talking about Emunah, the depth, the point of Yiddishkeit is the mitzvah, the state in Pasuk B'Teresh Baksav. So that's why the mitzvah, as it is written in the written Torah, number one, Allah ba'ala Yidin b'shava, it's equal by all Yidin. The Nekudas Hayadus, because that point of Judaism was Driptzachos in his Oideres Hamunah B'Hashem Chulu, which expresses in the belief of Hashem. So that's the point of your Yiddishkeit, is equal by everybody. That is equal by every Yid. From the Godel Shabbat, from the greatest amongst the great, is the Kotten Shabbat, to the smallest amongst the small. Also by very small children that are believers, sons of believer. Das is nicht verbunden mit Avon Soga, because that is not tied with understanding and grasping, nor with the etzem, hanefesh, vasidoba yadin, but with the essence of the soul, which every Jew possesses. So it doesn't make a difference. Men, women, even children, because it's not about their logic, their understanding. It's the amuna, it's the depth, is the inherent what they have, that amuna, that their foundation, their basis. So that's number one. Base. This is not instruction to every individual, nor zum hakil zum melech. This is only to the one who gathers to the king. But the richtige chizuk machzik is the true strength, the support, and the encouragement, the service, and the arousal for the nekudas hayadus of the point of Yiddishkeit, nekudas amunah, the point of belief. This as a poil of kol hayom, so that it can impact, as the pasuk says, for all days to come. Is nit b'koyach atzma. You can't do it with your own strength. But it's only because of and through the king. Was is the neshama klolis from klolus, the soul, the general soul of all the people, the nation in general. Is moving on inyan nifla was megefint by the mitzvah and hakel. So now we understand something very wondrous that we find by the mitzvah of hakel. Das poil nit nor af hameshech zman. This is not only impacts for a duration of some time. The megafin ba'ali l'regel, as we find that you go up to the holidays, that lasts till the next holiday. Not if kol hayomim, but rather this pairs for all of the days. Ashratam chayim ala adoma, that you live on the ground. But if dibichin is fabunim mit chidush of benefesh, that level is connected with the essence of the soul. But in them, there's no changes, so it lasts for a lifetime. That impact of the king, that he gives that level of bittul at Yerushalayim, the Amunah, that he impacts. Yudalef. Was there. So in addition to the posik, so the Torah, oral Torah, which is the Gemara Rashi, was in Nirvert Nizgalen, there is revealed those was his mufla mechusa tomer benelo, that which is distinct, it's covered, it's hidden, it's obscure. But you don't see in the pasuk directly. That comes into revelation through the Gemara and Rashi. In Torah Shebiksab, what is hidden there, Atzu dergilu uvehischaskus from the Ramuna dur the Melech, that to add to that revelation, and that the strengthening that comes from the belief that comes through the king, that dergilu from der nekuda, that also has to add to it the revelation of this point. That needs to impact, and it not needs to wake up, arouse the inner koiches, that by the individual. That is accomplished through the service of the individual. So while the king does the general arousal, wakes up, is the makil. But then the Gemara and Rashi explained that it has to be from the individual himself. But those and there is distinctions. And as it needs to be by everyone according to their way. Anoshim lilmoid, men to learn, women to know, and children lit in schak. Noch them is the Gemara Mamshel. As to bringen the Ketanim and Arayin and Oichzei in the mitzvah and Hakel. By bringing the minors and including them also in the midst of Hakel, together with the king. But then you get reward. What a schar means, the additional advantage in the koiches premium from the AM, in the inner strength of those who bring them. Perhaps we can say this can accomplish even more what they can do with themselves. So you have each one, the anoshim, no anoshim, limud, which they accomplish, but the major schar, the greatest accomplishment, comes the reward that they get by bringing them the Yud Beis. Then from this we have the lesson in practice, in actuality, as as the mitzvah of Hakel is the child of Poil. Although the mitzvah of Hakel does not apply now practically, loosely. Calls man the Beis Hamikdash is noch nicht aufgebaut geworden, as long as the Beis Hamikdash has not been built. The Torah is eternal. Is the mitzvah, but in the spiritual service of Hashem, we do have this mitzvah today, nowadays, in every place. And Darv Zen, you should see to it. The Meshach the Meir Chag Sukkos b'miyuchad, especially during the days of the festival of Sukkos. So tonight, you should gather as many Yidden as possible. Not looking into what condition this or the other Jew were there standing, including also the very little children. And how much more so the Yidden mitzvahs. Those Yidden that are actually obligated to mitzvahs, but they're still in the category in the Sut and Tav, in the like small children, as it relates to their knowledge in Torah and the keeping of the mitzvahs. You have to bring them in a gathering amongst Yidden. Even though it can be that in his knowledge, he's so small, he's like such a baby, he doesn't even reach the level of education, he knows nothing. He's not even capable yet to understand the meaning of Torah mitzvah Yiddishkeit. So by bringing in a gathering of Yidden, whenever there's 10 people, there is the divine presence. Especially in a gathering, a gathering whose intent, the idea is to arouse matter of fear of heaven. Help us too. So this helps us by in this Galavern, that bringing him in the gathering, that it should be revealed by him in the Kudas Yadus Amuna, the point of Judaism and belief, which is always together with Hashem, always faithful to Hashem. The inside, the point of Yadus, this will also impact us. That the one who brings should receive an additional reward and elevation is in his avodah. Also, as far as these children, so that point of belief will encompass him, penetrate him in ganzen totally, so that also his inner powers will change from that arousal of that Nekudus Amuna. As Varbiyim, the Shemi of the Limud, he gets the listening and learning. Bis to Yoru, as Avaya, Lekecha, they will fear God, your God, the Shomru, Lasses, and they will keep to do Shemalikim, Yerushamalikim, Shom Las, to do the mitzvahs. To them call godly Shubaheno. The merit to this great community will turn here, with the true and complete redemption through Mashiach, our rights of Mashiach, and Prav and Hakil, and then we will celebrate Hakil mit Melech HaMashiach, together with the King Mashiach, zusammen together with Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi, together in the third Beis HaMikdash. This is Mesiches Shabbos Parshas Breishis, Hisvadus Beis, Tovshin Lamed Dalet, and Purim Tovshin Chav Zayin, and Simchas Beis She'eva Tovshin Yud Gimel.